What happens when a country music superstar completely loses it on live television and exposes the truth that nobody wanted to hear? In just 30 seconds, everything changed on The View, and what Jelly Roll said on air will shock you to your core. Before we dive into this explosive confrontation, make sure you subscribe to our channel for daily videos exposing Hollywood's darkest scandals. Hit that notification bell because you won't want to miss what we uncover next. Last night's episode of The View started like any other morning talk show, but nobody could have predicted the absolute chaos that was about to unfold. Jelly Roll, the tattooed country rapper who's become one of music's biggest redemption stories, sat down at the table with the hosts, and from the very first moment, you could feel something was off. The conversation began friendly enough, with Whoopi Goldberg asking Jelly Roll about his latest album and his incredible weight loss journey. He was smiling, laughing, with the hosts cracking jokes about how he used to eat entire pizzas by himself, and now he's running marathons. He told heartwarming stories about his kids, about how his daughter is getting into music, about how becoming a father changed everything for him. The audience was clapping, laughing, completely charmed by his authenticity and humor. Joy Behar asked him about working with some of the biggest names in country music, and he had funny stories about being starstruck meeting his heroes. Ana Navarro wanted to know about his friendship with other artists who'd overcome adversity. Everything was going smoothly. The energy was light and positive. Jelly Roll was doing what he does best, connecting with people through his genuine, down-to-earth personality. But you could see Sunny Hostin sitting there, quieter than usual, and anyone who watches The View regularly knows that when Sunny gets quiet during a segment, she's loading up for something big. She had that look on her face, that serious expression that means she's about to shift the entire tone of the conversation. And sure enough, during a natural pause in the discussion, she seized her moment. "Jelly Roll, I want to talk about something serious," Sunny said, leaning forward with that look she gets when she's about to make a point. Her voice had changed completely from the light banter of moments before. "You've been very open about your criminal past, your time in jail. You've talked about dealing drugs, about the mistakes you made. You've built your entire brand around this redemption narrative. But here's what I want to know, and I think it's a question a lot of people are asking. Do you think someone with your history should really be the face of redemption? Shouldn't we be elevating people who made better choices from the start? People who grew up in similar circumstances but didn't turn to crime?" The table went completely silent. You could see Joy Behar's eyes go wide, and she mouthed something to Whoopi that the cameras didn't quite catch. Whoopi shifted uncomfortably in her seat, clearly sensing where this was heading. Ana Navarro looked down at her notes like she was suddenly very interested in what was written there. The audience didn't know whether to gasp or stay quiet, so an awkward murmur filled the studio. And Jelly Roll? His whole demeanor changed in an instant. The smile that had been plastered on his face for the last 15 minutes vanished like someone had flipped a switch. His jaw clenched tight. You could see his hands slowly grip the edge of the table, his knuckles turning white. "I'm sorry. What did you just say?" Jelly Roll asked, his voice dropping low and measured. That friendly, jovial tone that had filled the studio minutes ago was completely gone, replaced by something darker, something dangerous. This was a different person sitting at that table now, and everyone in that studio could feel the shift. Sunny didn't back down. She never does, and that's part of what makes her such a compelling host. But this time, it was clear she had hit a nerve she maybe didn't expect to hit so hard. "I'm saying that there are people who grew up in difficult circumstances who didn't turn to crime, who didn't hurt their communities, who made the choice, despite the hardship, to do the right thing. Why should we celebrate someone who made those destructive choices when there are people who made better ones and never got any recognition for it?" "Better choices?" Jelly Roll repeated, and you could hear the anger starting to build in his voice like a pot about to boil over. He leaned forward, his eyes locked on Sunny with an intensity that was uncomfortable to watch. "You think people in poverty, people who grew up with absolutely nothing, people who were failed by every single system that was supposed to protect and help them, you think they're just making choices like they're standing in front of a closet picking out what to wear in the morning? Like it's that simple?" Alyssa Farah Griffin tried to jump in, sensing that this conversation was spiraling fast. She raised her hand like she was trying to flag down a runaway train. I think what Sonny might be trying to say is, but Jelly Roll cut her off, his voice sharp and filled with barely controlled rage. No, let her say what she means. Please, let her finish. She thinks she's better than people like me. She thinks because she had opportunities, because she went to law school, because she got to grow up in a house where she never had to wonder where her next meal was coming from, never had to choose between electricity and food, never had to watch her parents destroy themselves with addiction just to cope with poverty, that makes her more deserving of success. That makes her more worthy of redemption. That makes her qualified to judge people whose lives she can't even begin to understand. Sonny's face was getting red now, her professional composure starting to crack. You could tell she wasn't used to being challenged like this on her own show, especially not this directly, especially not with this much raw emotion. Most guests back down when she goes after them, but Jelly Roll was leaning in. That's not what I said, and you know it. You're twisting my words, and that's not fair. I'm asking a legitimate question about accountability, about responsibility, about consequences. You sold drugs, Jelly Roll. You admitted it yourself. You hurt people. You destroyed families. You contributed to the addiction crisis that's killing people every single day. And now you're a multimillionaire making music about overcoming struggles that you created for yourself. Don't you see the problem with that? Don't you see how that looks? The audience gasped at that one. That was a low blow, and everyone in that studio knew it. You could feel the air get sucked out of the room. Jelly Roll stood up from his chair, not aggressively, but you could see his whole body was tense, coiled like a spring ready to snap. His hands were shaking, whether from anger or emotion or both was impossible to tell. Struggles I created for myself? His voice cracked on those words, and you could hear years of pain behind them. You think I created the poverty I was born into? You think I woke up as a kid and said, hey, I want to be born in a trailer park with nothing? You think I created the abuse that I suffered? You think I created the fact that I had to raise myself because my parents were too busy fighting their own demons? You think I created a system that throws kids away like garbage and then punishes them for trying to survive in whatever way they can? He was pointing at her now, his fingers shaking. I was 14 years old when I made my first real mistake. 14. I was a child who was hungry, who was scared, who didn't have anyone looking out for him. And you want to sit there in your designer clothes, with your law degree, with your comfortable life, and tell me that I should have known better? That I should have made better choices? Nobody forced you to break the law, Sonny shot back, and now she was standing too, her voice rising to match his intensity. The other hosts looked like they wanted to disappear into their chairs. Whoopi had her head in her hands, probably thinking about how they were going to edit this for the West Coast feed. Joy was nervously shuffling papers. This was spiraling out of control faster than anyone could have predicted, and there was no stopping it now. You're right, Jelly Roll said, his voice getting louder, echoing through the studio. You're absolutely right. Nobody forced me. I made those choices. And I paid for every single one of them. Do you hear me? Every single one. I sat in jail cells. I lost years of my life. I missed my daughter's first steps, her first words, her first day of school. I wasn't there for birthdays and Christmases and all the moments that matter, because I was locked up paying for my mistakes. I hurt people I loved. I disappointed everyone who believed in me. I looked at myself in the mirror and hated what I saw. I know what I did, and I carry that guilt every damn day of my life. It's the first thing I think about when I wake up, and the last thing I think about before I go to sleep. He was pointing at her again, his voice cracking with raw emotion, tears starting to form in his eyes. But what I won't do, what I refuse to do, is sit here and let someone who has no idea what it's like to grow up the way I did, someone who's never faced real desperation, real hopelessness, real poverty, someone who's never had to choose between doing the wrong thing and watching your family suffer, tell me that I don't deserve a second chance. Tell me that I shouldn't be an example of what's possible when people actually get the help and support they need instead of being thrown away like trash. Sonny wasn't backing down either, and this is what made the confrontation so explosive, the fact that neither person was willing to give an inch. Her voice was sharp, cutting through the tension like a knife. An example? You want to talk about being an example? You're making millions and millions of dollars off your sob story while the communities you damaged with your drug dealing are still suffering. Those families you hurt, they're not writing hit songs about their pain. They're not getting book deals. They're not being celebrated for surviving what you put them through. Where's your accountability there? Where's your responsibility to the people whose lives you helped destroy when you were out there, dealing drugs, contributing to the addiction crisis, making money off other people's misery? That's when Jelly Roll really lost it. His face was red, veins bulging in his neck, and when he spoke, his voice filled the entire studio. Sob story? You think my life is a sob story? You think the 15-year-old kid who was selling drugs to keep the lights on in his house, to put food on the table for his younger siblings, was thinking about his future music career? You think that kid had the privilege of thinking about anything except making it through another day? You think he was planning his redemption arc for a talk show appearance 20 years later? His voice was shaking now, full of raw emotion that was impossible to fake. I give back every single chance I get. Every dollar I can spare goes to programs that help kids like I was. I talk to kids in jails, kids who remind me of myself, and I tell them there's another way. I fund addiction recovery programs. I support families dealing with poverty. I use every bit of my platform to try to change the system that failed me and millions of other people just like me. But people like you, people who sit in your comfortable studios with your law degrees and your judgment and your perfect lives, you don't want to hear about that. You don't want to acknowledge that because it doesn't fit your narrative. You just want to feel superior. You want to look down on people like me so you can feel better about yourselves. The show was in complete chaos now. You could see producers in the background frantically gesturing, probably screaming in everyone's earpieces to cut to commercial, to do something, anything to stop this train wreck happening in real time. But the cameras kept rolling because what else could they do? This was the most dramatic, most explosive moment in The View's history, and it was happening live on national television. There was no taking it back, no editing it out. This was raw, unfiltered, brutal honesty playing out for millions of viewers. Sarah Haynes, bless her heart, tried her best to calm things down. She had her hands up like she was trying to separate two fighters. Okay, everyone, let's all just take a breath here. This is getting very intense. I think we're all getting a bit heated, and maybe we need to step back for a second. We can have this conversation without... But Sunny cut her off, and her voice had an edge to it now that sent shivers down everyone's spine. No, Sarah. I'm not going to apologize for asking tough questions. That's what journalists do. That's what we do on this show. We hold people accountable. And if Jelly Roll can't handle being challenged on his past, if he can't handle someone questioning whether he deserves the platform he has, maybe he shouldn't be doing interviews about it. Maybe he should stick to making music and leave the serious conversations to people who can handle them. The gasps from the audience were audible now. That was brutal, and everyone knew it. Jelly Roll laughed, but it wasn't a happy laugh. It was bitter, angry, full of years of being dismissed and looked down on. Can't handle being challenged? Lady, I've been challenged my whole damn life. I've been challenged by poverty that you can't even imagine. I've been challenged by addiction, by abuse, by a criminal justice system that wanted to throw me away forever and never think about me again. I've been challenged by people telling me every single day that I'll never amount to anything, that I'm worthless, that I'm garbage, that I don't deserve happiness or success or love. I've been challenged by my own demons, by my own guilt, by waking up every morning and having to fight to believe I deserve another day. He leaned forward, his hands on the table, looking Sunny straight in the eye with an intensity that was almost frightening. What I can't handle, what I won't tolerate, is privileged people who've never walked a single day in shoes like mine, sitting in judgment like they have any right to. You want to talk about accountability? Let's talk about the accountability of a society that creates the conditions for people to fail and then blames them when they do. Let's talk about the accountability of a system that offers no help, no support, no opportunity, and then acts shocked when people do whatever they have to do to survive. Sunny's voice was ice cold now, each word deliberate and cutting. So nothing is ever your fault? Everything's always society's fault? That's a really convenient excuse for someone who's made a fortune selling redemption. At what point do you take personal responsibility without blaming everyone else? It's not an excuse, it's reality, Jelly Roll shouted, and now he was really yelling, his voice echoing off the studio walls, probably rattling equipment. His face was flushed, his eyes were wet with tears he was fighting to hold back. I took responsibility for what I did. I served my time. I paid my debt to society. I changed my entire life from the ground up. I became a better person. But you don't want to acknowledge that because it's easier to judge than to understand. It's easier to tear people down than to lift them up. It's easier to maintain your moral superiority than to admit that good people can do bad things. When they're desperate, Whoopi finally tried to intervene, her voice loud and commanding. Okay, everyone, let's just calm down right now. We're getting way too heated here. Jelly Roll, But Jelly Roll was done listening. He was done explaining himself. He was done defending his existence to people who would never understand. He ripped off his microphone with such force that it made a horrible screeching sound through the speakers, and he threw it on the table where it bounced once and fell to the floor. The sound echoed through the studio like a gunshot. You know what? I don't need this. I don't need to sit here and be judged by someone who's never lived a day in the real world. I came here thinking we were going to have a real conversation about redemption, about second chances, about how we can actually help people instead of throwing them away like garbage. But all you want to do is tear me down to make yourself feel better about your privilege. He looked around at all the hosts, his eyes moving from face to face, but they kept settling back on Sonny with a mixture of anger and disappointment. I've sat across from judges who sentenced me to years in jail, who showed me more respect and humanity than you just did. At least they were honest about their judgment. At least they didn't pretend to be asking questions when they were really just looking for ways to make themselves feel superior. You hide yours behind this fake concern about accountability, behind this performance of caring about communities. But what you really care about is maintaining your position above people like me. Sonny stood her ground, refusing to back down even as the situation deteriorated in front of millions of viewers. I am being honest, and if you can't handle honesty, if you can't handle being challenged on your narrative, that says everything about you and nothing about me. The truth hurts, and maybe that's why you're so upset. Jelly Roll shook his head, slowly, and you could see the disgust written all over his face, mixed with something that looked almost like pity. You don't know the first thing about honesty. Real honesty would be admitting that you're only this hard on people like me because it makes you feel better about your own privilege. Because if you acknowledge that good people can make terrible mistakes when they're desperate, when they're hopeless, when they have no other options, you'd have to confront how lucky you were to never be put in that position. You'd have to admit that maybe, just maybe, if you'd grown up the way I did, you might have made the same choices. And that terrifies you because it means you're not better than me. You're just luckier. The tension in that studio was absolutely suffocating. You could feel it through the screen. The other hosts looked mortified, like they wanted the floor to open up and swallow them whole. The audience was dead silent, not a cough or a shuffle, everyone frozen, watching this train wreck unfold. This had gone way beyond a normal disagreement, way beyond a heated debate. This was personal now. This was raw. This was two people's fundamental worldviews colliding head-on with no possibility of reconciliation. I've spent my whole life being told I'm not good enough, Jelly Roll continued, and now his voice was thick with emotion, cracking on almost every word. You could see tears streaming down his face, but he wasn't trying to hide them anymore. Not good enough to succeed, not good enough to change, not good enough to be loved, not good enough to deserve happiness, not good enough to be anything but the worst thing I ever did. And I fought like hell to prove those people wrong. I clawed my way out of poverty, I battled my demons, I got clean. I turned my life around from the bottom up. I became a better person. I became a good father. I became successful against every single odd that was stacked against me. I did everything society says people like me should do. I took responsibility. I made amends. I used my platform for good. And it's still not enough for people like you. He grabbed his jacket from the back of his chair with shaking hands. But you know what? I don't need to prove anything to you or anyone else anymore. I'm done begging for acceptance from people who were never going to give it to me anyway. My fans know who I am. The people I've helped know what I do. The kids who see my story and realize they can change their lives too, they know the truth. And the families I support, the programs I fund, the lives I've touched, they know what I'm really about. Your opinion? It doesn't matter to me. Not anymore. Not when it comes from a place of ignorance and privilege. Sunny crossed her arms. If my opinion doesn't matter, why are you so upset? That question seemed to be the final straw. Jelly Roll looked at her with something between pity and anger. I'm not upset because of your opinion. I'm upset because people like you have platforms to spread this kind of judgment, and it hurts people who are trying to change their lives. When you say stuff like this on national television, you're telling every person who's made mistakes that they don't deserve redemption. You're telling them they should give up because society will never see them as anything but their worst moments. He started walking toward the edge of the stage. That's dangerous, that's harmful, and it's bullshit, Whoopi called after him. Jelly Roll, wait, let's talk about this. But he didn't stop. He turned back one more time, looked directly at the camera. To everyone watching who's trying to turn their life around, who's fighting to be better than their past, don't let people like this discourage you. Your mistakes don't define you. Your worst day doesn't determine your worth, and anyone who says different is selling something they want you to buy. Then he looked back at Sunny one last time. You can judge me all you want, but I sleep well at night knowing I'm actually trying to make a difference instead of just tearing people down from my high horse. The production team was scrambling. You could see people running around behind the cameras. Security didn't know if they should intervene. The hosts were all talking at once, trying to salvage what was left of the show. But Jelly Roll was done. He walked straight through the audience section, past the shocked faces of the people who had come to see a morning talk show, and instead witnessed an absolute meltdown. Someone tried to stop him at the door, probably a producer, but he brushed past them without a word. The cameras followed him until he disappeared through the exit, and then they cut back to the hosts, who all looked like they'd just witnessed a car crash. The show went to commercial immediately, but the damage was done. That confrontation was out there, live and raw, and impossible to take back. Sunny sat back down, her face flushed, looking shaken despite trying to maintain her composure. The other hosts were trying to figure out what to say, how to move forward, but there was no moving forward from that. That was the moment that would define this episode, this confrontation that laid bare the fundamental divide between people who've lived through real struggle and those who judge it from a distance. Jelly Roll's words hung in the air even after he was gone, a challenge to everyone watching about how we treat people who are trying to be better than their past. And whether you agreed with him or with Sunny, one thing was clear. This was the most explosive exit in talk show history, and nobody who saw it would forget it anytime soon. The raw honesty of that moment, the genuine emotion, the refusal to back down on either side, it created television that was impossible to look away from. And while the show tried to continue after the commercial break, acting like things were normal, everyone knew nothing would ever be quite the same after what just happened on that stage. That confrontation exposed something deeper than just a disagreement between a host and a guest. It exposed the fault lines in how we talk about redemption, about privilege, about who deserves second chances and who gets to decide. And in 30 seconds of explosive television, Jelly Roll made sure that conversation would continue long after he walked off that stage.